Alienating the family of Germanicus was only part of Sejanus's strategy. There was another obstacle, arguably the most personal and most dangerous one. Drusus Julius Caesar, not to be confused with Germanicus's son of the same name, was Tiberius's own biological son. He was the emperor's primary heir. His existence represented the most fundamental limit on Sejanus's ambitions. As long as Drusus lived and remained in favor, Sejanus could never achieve formal imperial succession. And Sejanus had decided that formal imperial succession was his ultimate goal. The relationship between Sejanus and Drusus was one of barely concealed mutual contempt. Drusus understood what Sejanus was doing, or at least sensed it, and made no effort to hide his hostility. Ancient sources record a public incident in which Drusus struck Sejanus during a heated argument. It was a significant insult, a physical demonstration of the social distance between a Caesar and a mere equestrian commander. For most men it would have been a humiliation to be endured. For Sejanus it was a data point. A confirmation that Drusus was an obstacle that could not be managed through the usual methods of flattery and manipulation. What happened next was not discovered until years after the fact, and only then through a confession extracted under circumstances of extreme duress. Sejanus had been conducting a secret affair with Livilla, Drusus's own wife. It was a relationship of extraordinary recklessness and extraordinary calculation simultaneously. Reckless because discovery would have been catastrophic. Calculated because Livilla was exactly the asset Sejanus needed, someone inside the imperial household, trusted by Drusus, with unlimited access to his daily life. Together Sejanus and Livilla arranged the slow poisoning of Drusus Caesar. The poison was administered gradually, carefully calibrated to produce symptoms consistent with natural illness. Drusus died in 23 AD after a period of declining health. Tiberius was devastated. He had lost his only biological son, the heir he had been grooming for succession. The emperor grieved openly and genuinely. The Senate offered elaborate condolences. And Sejanus, standing at Tiberius's side, offering comfort and support, was the man who had murdered his son. The depth of the betrayal was almost incomprehensible. And it would remain hidden for 8 years. By 26 AD Sejanus had achieved something Rome had never seen before. He had effectively become the ruler of the empire without holding any formal imperial title. The process had been so gradual, so carefully managed, so wrapped in the language of loyal service that most Romans, including Tiberius himself, had not fully registered what had happened. In 26 AD Tiberius made the decision that completed Sejanus's takeover. Exhausted by public life, consumed by paranoia, increasingly convinced that Rome itself was hostile to him, the emperor left the capital and retreated to the island of Capri off the coast of Naples. He would never return to Rome. For the remaining 11 years of his reign he governed the empire from a series of luxurious villas on a small Mediterranean island, communicating with the capital entirely through written correspondence. The implications were staggering. Every letter to Tiberius passed through Sejanus's hands. Every petition, every intelligence report, every senatorial communication, every military dispatch. He decided what the emperor read. He decided what context surrounded it. He decided what responses went back. Tiberius was still emperor in name and in law, his authority was absolute and unquestioned. But the man actually governing Rome on a daily basis, making decisions, managing the Senate, directing the courts, controlling the military, was Sejanus. The Roman people adapted to this new reality with the pragmatic flexibility that had always characterized their political culture. Senators courted Sejanus's favor with the same elaborate rituals they had once reserved for emperors. Generals sought his approval before major decisions. Foreign ambassadors paid their respects to him before seeking official audiences. His portrait was displayed in public spaces alongside Tiberius's, an honor without precedent for a non-imperial figure. He had achieved the substance of imperial power while carefully avoiding its form. He was, in every meaningful sense, the Emperor of Rome. He simply hadn't taken the title yet. By 30 AD, Sejanus had everything except the title. And he had decided the title mattered. Not for vanity, Sejanus was too calculating for vanity, but because without formal imperial status his position was ultimately dependent on Tiberius's continued trust. A trust that could be withdrawn at any moment. A trust that had already been shaken by the affair with Livilla, though Tiberius did not yet know the full extent of that relationship's consequences. His strategy for formalizing his position was marriage. If he could marry Livilla, now widowed from the man he had murdered, he would have a formal connection to the imperial family and a credible claim to be considered part of the succession. He approached Tiberius with the proposal in a carefully worded letter that emphasized his loyal service, his modest origins, and his purely practical reasons for the request. Tiberius's response was characteristically ambiguous, neither a clear approval nor a clear refusal. A lesser man might have taken this as encouragement. Sejanus took it as a signal to continue accumulating power while waiting for a more favorable moment. In 31 AD, Sejanus reached the peak of his official career. He was granted the consulship, sharing Rome's highest magistracy with Tiberius himself. It was an almost unprecedented honor for someone of his background. Equestrians simply did not hold the consulship alongside emperors. The appointment signaled to everyone in Rome that Sejanus was being positioned for something even greater. The throne itself seemed within reach. He was 51 years old. He had spent 30 years building toward this moment. And then, in a single afternoon, everything ended. Exactly what caused Tiberius to turn against Sejanus remains one of history's most debated questions. The ancient sources are contradictory and fragmentary, written by men who had every reason to simplify a complex story into a morality tale of ambition punished. What we can reconstruct is this: sometime in 31 AD something pierced the information bubble that Sejanus had built around the emperor. Some warning reached Tiberius that his most trusted advisor was not what he appeared to be. The most credible account suggests that Antonia Minor, one of the most respected women in Rome and a figure of unimpeachable loyalty to the imperial family, found a way to communicate directly with Tiberius on Capri, bypassing Sejanus's information network entirely. What she told him we do not know with certainty. But whatever it was enough to make the emperor begin quietly investigating the man he had trusted with everything. What followed was a masterpiece of imperial deception. Tiberius needed to destroy Sejanus without giving him any warning, because a warned Sejanus, in control of Rome's military, could simply stage a coup. The solution was the letter. A massive, rambling document addressed to the Senate, so long and so apparently disorganized that nobody could predict where it was going. Tiberius arranged for it to be carried to Rome by a trusted messenger, bypassing Sejanus entirely. The Senate was convened on October 18, 31 AD under the pretext of routine business. Sejanus attended that Senate session expecting another routine confirmation of his status, perhaps another honor, another title, another step toward the formal position he had been building toward for 30 years. The letter began being read aloud. It opened with minor matters. Senators shifted in their seats. Sejanus listened. Then the letter began criticizing certain unnamed individuals. The mood in the chamber changed almost imperceptibly. Senators who had been sitting near Sejanus began quietly moving away. The letter continued. The criticism became more specific, more pointed. The senators around Sejanus were now actively distancing themselves, the ancient Roman political instinct for self-preservation operating with practiced efficiency. By the time the letter reached its conclusion, ordering Sejanus's immediate arrest, the most powerful man in Rome was standing completely alone in the middle of the Senate floor. The men who had courted his favor for years, who had competed for his attention, who had informed on their friends and colleagues to maintain his approval, every single one of them had already chosen survival over loyalty. The Praetorian Guard, his Praetorian Guard, the instrument of his power, had been quietly transferred to new command before the session began. He had nothing. In the space of one letter read aloud in a Senate chamber, 30 years of carefully constructed power had simply ceased to exist. The destruction of Sejanus was as total as it was swift. Within hours of his arrest, the Roman mob, the same people who had displayed his portrait in their homes and businesses, turned on him with a fury that shocked even hardened observers. His statues were pulled from their pedestals and smashed in the streets. His name was attacked with chisels wherever it appeared on public monuments. His supporters were arrested, tried, and executed in waves that continued for years. His children were killed, including his young daughter, who had to be violated before execution to satisfy a legal technicality that prohibited the killing of virgins. Rome's revenge had no floor. The Senate voted for damnatio memoriae, the formal condemnation of Sejanus's memory. His name was to be removed from all public records. His image destroyed. His achievements unacknowledged. It almost worked. For centuries he existed in the historical record primarily as a cautionary tale, the corrupt prefect who reached too far. Only modern scholarship has begun to reconstruct the full scale of what he actually achieved and how close he came to fundamentally altering the history of the Roman Empire. The fall of Sejanus did not bring relief to Rome. It brought something worse, the full force of Tiberius's paranoia with no Sejanus to channel or moderate it. The treason trials that had been Sejanus's weapon now became Tiberius's obsession. The Senate lived in permanent terror. The remaining years of Tiberius's reign, he died in 37 AD, were among the darkest in Roman imperial history. The machine of fear that Sejanus had built to serve his own ambitions had become a permanent feature of Roman political life. It would take generations to dismantle. Agrippa built Rome's empire with his sword. Maecenas preserved it with his pen. Sejanus nearly destroyed it with his patience. 3 men. 3 weapons. 3 definitions of what power actually means. None of them ever sat on the throne. All of them shaped it more profoundly than most emperors ever did. Sejanus came closer to stealing the Roman Empire than anyone before or since. He was undone not by a rival army or a popular uprising but by a single letter from an old man on an island who finally understood what had been happening in his name. Power, in the end, is always borrowed. The question is whether you realize it before the letter arrives. He who stands closest to the throne casts the longest shadow. But shadows disappear the moment the light changes direction. Who do you think came closest to stealing the Roman Empire? Sejanus the Bodyguard, or someone history hasn't told you about yet? Comment below. Episode 4 of Shadow History drops next Saturday. Subscribe so you don't miss it.